They're also pretty. Clearing the land, planting trees in neat rows, and managing soil built that landscape that Mitchell described as an extensive park. There are so many of these examples of Aboriginals managing the land that Norman Tyndale was able to draw this map of indigenous grain areas, which stretched out across the continent. The native people would take seeds from one area and bring them to others where they did not occur naturally. They could trade them for other goods and services, as well as simply giving them as gifts. Selecting seeds and moving them across such distances over long periods of time slowly changed them, resulting in some of the plants taking on the attributes of domesticated plants. Thomas Mitchell stated, "In the neighbourhood of our camp, the grass had been pulled to a very great extent and piled in hayricks, extending for miles, that had evidently been thus laid up by the natives. But for what purpose, we could not imagine." It wasn't until 100 years later that researchers figured out that the hayricks were being used to ripen the seeds in the grass, which were then collected, cleaned, stored, and used to make bread. Through seed selection, precise planting, and weeding, the Aboriginals created crops that thrived in Australia's harsh climate, like the bush tomato, used by the central desert people for thousands of years. It has become dependent on people for its survival and spread. Surplus harvests were rolled up into balls that could be stored for years. Professor Ian Shivers argues that in Australia we have stunning examples of very long-term grain food production that had no degrading impact on the environment, that did not require extensive fertilizers or pesticides, and grew without the need for irrigation water. The delicate science of baking popped up along with these harvests. We've discovered grindstones at Cuddy Springs in New South Wales that are over 30,000 years old, making the Aboriginals the world's oldest bakers. In the reed marshes near Swan Hill, James Kirby was intrigued by massive mounds dotting the landscape. From what he could see, they were emitting steam. He discovered that they were in fact gigantic ovens used for cooking. In this harsh land, the Aboriginal people produced a surplus, and surplus food production is one of the characteristics of agriculture. They had to take advantage of every niche possible in order to do this. They grew the nardo plant because it could grow in the beds of shallow lakes in otherwise inhospitable regions. As the lakes dried, explorers observed Aboriginals sweeping the seeds into huge piles and processing it into flour. Many explorers only barely survived their journeys after borrowing from these native stockpiles. John Davies, a member of one of the search parties for the famous Burke and Wills expedition, reported of the huge quantities of nardo seed he saw in the Sturzeliki Desert, reminding us that desert is really just a place where Europeans can grow wheat and sheep. Everything was preserved, from moths all the way to fish. Preserved caterpillars were made into a kind of flour, and figs and quandong were pulped and mixed into an edible paste.